Welcome back. Today we're going to be starting a new MBTI and Enneagram series on the BioShock series, starting off with BioShock Infinite. Now before we continue, I want to give you a warning. There's going to be major spoilers, so I suggest you play the games. Actually, I don't just suggest you play the games. I recommend you play the games because the BioShock series is amazing. And with that being said, we're going to move on to our MBTI and Enneagram analysis of Elizabeth from BioShock Infinite. Due to the nature and complexity of her character, we're going to be breaking up this analysis into 3 segments. The main storyline Elizabeth, the brainwashed alternate version of Elizabeth, and the burial at sea Elizabeth. Each one of these characters is exactly the same person, but they have different experiences, which causes their personalities to somewhat vary. And our dominant function for all the Elizabeths is extroverted intuition. Elizabeth is a prominent example of someone who uses extroverted intuition as her first function. She's obsessed with gaining vast amount of information on as many subjects as humanly possible, intending to improve herself and stave off boredom. Speaking of subjects, she studied physics in order to understand her abilities, lockpicking, history, and medicine. Elizabeth is also always seeking novel ways to gain more mental and physical stimulation. This causes her to be very impulsive with her actions and decision-makings, such as coming up with conclusions too quickly with limited information.
Miss Tara, I'm not so sure it was a good idea.
I'm sort of feeling attacked here because I'm very much the same way. Here are some examples of her impulsive nature. At Soldiers Field, Elizabeth and Booker run into a problem. They need a vigor called Shock Jockey to power up the gauntlet to escape from Columbia. Elizabeth proposes going to the Hall of Heroes because she sees an ad suggesting that they have some stock there.
Look! Come see the future of power at the Hall of Heroes.
Huh. Well, that's convenient.
She ends up being horribly wrong, since the revolutionaries ransacked the Hall of Heroes, and all the Shock Jockey vigors were gone.
The whole place is ransacked. There ain't no shock jockey here.
The second example occurs when the elevator they're taking to the Hall of Heroes gets jammed. Booker offers a practical solution, while Elizabeth impulsively opens a tear because there's a bee in the elevator.
Oh, it's a bee. I hate these things.
Which almost gets her and Booker killed by the songbird. Speaking of tears, Elizabeth constantly opens up new ones into alternate versions of Columbia without considering the consequence to her actions. This is because she wants to escape the floating city and go to Paris. This plan ultimately backfires and causes her and Booker additional problems. Like that one time when they entered a multiverse where Booker died for the Vox Populi and never made a deal with Daisy Fitzroy for the First Lady airship, thus eliminating their only means of leaving Columbia, and also making an enemy of the Vox Populi. This problem will haunt them for the rest of the game. Our last examples of Elizabeth's impulsive nature occur when she's left idle. She'll investigate random items such as arcade machines, stuffed animals, people, and will pick up ammo or health packs whenever she sees Booker needs aid. I think it's a little obvious that she is incapable of staying still. But wait, there's more. We can observe more indicators of extrovert intuition in her aptitude for brainstorming, thinking outside the box, and finding patterns within ideas and actions. For brainstorming, she'll offer alternate suggestions to aid Booker in their adventure, such as searching for more information by going off the beaten path via locked doors, or sneaking around the enemies to avoid them altogether. As for thinking outside the box, we have a funny example. This occurs when Elizabeth is running away from Booker because she found out he was planning on selling her. During this chase, she opens up 4 tears. The first one contains over 30 oversized party balloons. The second one contains a marching band. The third, a train that cuts off Booker. And the fourth has her entering a tear through a wall into an open space where she ironically gets captured by 2 guards.
No! Let me go!
We got her!
As for finding patterns, we often witness Elizabeth analyzing her surroundings and questioning them to find the hidden meanings within them. The diorama of Soldiers Field is an exceptional example. After staring at it for a few seconds, Elizabeth suggests they created it to acquaint children to the military for the purpose of instilling Columbian views within them, making them loyal to Comstock's regime for life. As you can see, Elizabeth relies heavily on her NE function.
Oh, this is wonderful!
Even her endgame ability to see all potential outcomes of all situations is an exaggerated God version of NE. However, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. The traumatic events she experienced throughout the game have caused her to become mentally unhealthy, and as a consequence, she frequently relies on her lower functions. This effect on her psyche can best be seen in the DLC Burial at Sea. And speaking of that DLC, we're going to be looking into the Burial at Sea version of Elizabeth. Just like in the base game, Elizabeth uses NE as her dominant function, but she will often enter NE and TE loops with the occasional SI grip.
I suppose you could say I work in debt collection.
This is because at the end of the base game, Elizabeth creates a paradox by killing Booker DeWitt before he could become Comstock, thus stopping her birth. This caused the memories, thoughts, and emotions of all other Elizabeths to collapse into her according to the BioShock wiki page. With that being said, we'll be focusing on examples of her usage of extrovert intuition. Other than her damaged psyche, Elizabeth remains as inquisitive as always. To acquaint herself quickly into Rapture Society, she stole the first dress she saw and then spent over 2 months reading as many books as humanly possible on Rapture Society and ideologies. However, because any DOMs are pattern and idea-driven, they don't strive often in new settings, and we could observe this by all the questions Elizabeth asks Booker, such as what are little sisters and splicers. This causes him to become very suspicious and question her intentions and where she's from.
Funny.
What?
You're not knowing about the little sisters. How long have you been in Rapture?
Let's just say I don't get out much.
You've got eyes and ears, don't you?
Luckily for Elizabeth, she's a fast and creative thinker and can make up stories on the fly, to which she does, and this dampens Booker's suspicions about her. Another indicator of her NE usage can be seen in how Elizabeth thinks outside the box when in competitive situations, such as suggesting to use Big Daddies to her advantage,
Enemy of my enemy.
or hiding in vents to either stealthily knock out enemies or avoid them entirely. Alright, we've gone through a lot of information, so we're going to have a mini intermission and introduce something new to this. We're going to have a fun fact. In 1999 mode, Elizabeth can't use lethal weapons to take out enemies. I could only assume it's because of her moral code of not hurting anyone. This style of gameplay differs completely from Booker's SE-type gameplay, where he just runs and guns like the big action hero he is. And now we'll be returning back to our analysis. Another indicator for any function is Elizabeth's ability to react and read situations quickly. During the quest to find Sally, Booker and Elizabeth run into a problem. They require a plasmid named Old Man Winter. She opens up a tear to retrieve it and lies to a very suspicious Booker, claiming that it's a new plasmid that she can't tell him about, called Tear.
What's it called?
Tear.
Clever, Elizabeth. Very clever. And finally, we have our last 3 examples of her NE function. These examples will revolve around a negative trait that Elizabeth possesses. And that's assuming things too quickly.
Does this strike you as good news? Doesn't strike me as good news.
And Elizabeth is notorious of doing this. Our first example. Elizabeth assumed that the songbird and her were imprinted just by looking at one piece of information, to which she ends up being incorrect, according to Fink's research. The second false assumption occurs twice by the same person. It first occurs when Elizabeth repairs the Lutece device and enters the tear to retrieve the Lutece particle. And on her way back through the tear, Suchong stops her and tells her that she can't come back unless she brings him a hair sample he wants.
You get for Suchong, then everybody friends.
Obviously, this is annoying to Elizabeth because now she has to run around Columbia looking for a hair sample. And as she comes back, she assumes that Suchong will hold his end of the deal and places the hair sample within the bin. And then she gets betrayed again.
Suchong, we had a deal, now open.
And this time, she's turned over to Andrew Ryan. And those are 3 examples of Elizabeth making false assumptions. We're going to end this on a positive note and give her a correct assumption. And this is when Elizabeth knew that Atlas would not honor his deal.
You honestly expect Atlas to honor his side of the deal?
No, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Even though he tried convincing her, she saw through him. And now we're on to our next function. Elizabeth's auxiliary function is introverted feeling. One thing is for certain, Elizabeth is an emotional individual. She often wears her heart on her sleeve and acts in the best interest for others. This makes it seem as if she uses the extroverted feeling function instead, but that isn't true. Extroverted feeling relies on the outside world to gain information and tries to harmonize with it. Elizabeth shows some use of it, such as feeling bad for people affected by Fink's abusive neglect and empathizing with Miss Lynn after losing her husband. However, there are more examples of FI usage than against it, and we're about to explore them. These are best seen within the interactions between Booker and Elizabeth. The first example occurs after they survive escaping the tower Elizabeth was imprisoned in by falling from the sky into the beach water. And instead of taking care of Booker, she decides dancing would be a better choice.
Oh, come dance with me, Mr. DeWitt.
I don't dance. Come on, let's go.
Why? What could be better than this?
Our next example can be seen during their multi-dimensional adventures. Elizabeth loses interest in Paris for a temporary period of time. Instead, she decided she wants to join the Vox Populi revolution on the account of Daisy Fitzroy having a convincing argument for it, while Booker didn't want to join. In fact, he didn't even want to be there, and was just being strung along by Elizabeth.
Daisy's moved these people. Things can change, Booker, and we can be a part of it.
I don't want to be a part of it. Once we get our airship, we'll be well shut of this place.
And as the game progresses, Elizabeth becomes more confrontational against Booker and forces him to either help her or get out of her way, because now she wants to kill Comstock.
This is where you start moralizing, Booker. You forget. I know you.
I'm not going to let you kill him.
She also threatens killing Booker with a tornado out of all things because he wanted to leave Columbia instead of fight. But after seeing the tornado, he decided he'd kill Comstock for her. I think he did this out of fear. To make matters worse, Booker's death was because Elizabeth decided she wanted to end the existence of Comstock, and that meant killing her father, Booker DeWitt, because they're the same person.
No. I'm both.
The final indicator of introverted feeling can be seen in how she refuses to follow societal standards for both Columbia and Rapture. Instead, she tries to force both of them to change, to match her own personal views and values. For Columbia, that means going against its theocratic and racist government system, and for Rapture, that means saving the little sisters. This is because she believes everyone should be equal, and little girls deserve the right to live free lives, and not be used as atom factories. An FE user would harmonize with that societal system or avoid conflict so they may achieve their goals, while an FI user like Elizabeth would stay true to their beliefs and be confrontational against the system, which is exactly what she does.
Rapture runs on children. Little girls with gold growing in their bellies. I'm not gonna break any cycle. If I'm lucky, maybe I can dent it. Just a little.
And now we'll be moving on to the Burial at Sea version of Elizabeth. All the events of Burial at Sea occur because of Elizabeth's FI function. Her strong morals and ideals demonstrate a clear example of how the FI function acts in these situations. It's a story about a revenge plot against the last remaining Zachary Hale Comstock, who took over Booker DeWitt's identity. She wants to force him to face his own lies and make him realize that he's a monster before she kills him. During that time with Booker, Elizabeth would constantly criticize Rapture society, mainly the treatment of the Little Sisters and Rapture's dog-eat-dog society, for not reflecting with her views. Once Elizabeth succeeds at her mission of eliminating Comstock, she's overtaken by grief, since she realizes she used Sally to get to Comstock and left her behind to an uncertain fate.
I'm sorry! I never should have left. I never should have left you there.
This prompts her to leave her imaginary NE-FI-influenced version of Paris, where everyone is an artist and sings and dances, to return to Rapture, where she died to save Sally. By doing this, she sacrifices her quantum superposition, which reverts her back to a normal human being who has no powers or knowledge of the unknown. This means Elizabeth literally sacrifices being an all-knowing being because she felt bad for leaving Sally, because that went against her core values. Our tertiary function is extroverted thinking. Elizabeth prefers and trusts external sources of information to understand the world around her. She often does this by reading books and putting her newly acquired knowledge to practical uses. Speaking of newly acquired knowledge, she loves mentioning facts about the world to share that knowledge, such as the beach in Battleship Bay being created in 6 months, history about Comstock and his battles of Wounded Knee in the Boxer Rebellion, even though Cornelia Slate keeps telling her that that history is incorrect, or false information about Daisy Fitzroy and how she wants to tear Columbia apart. Elizabeth also seems to prefer inductive reasoning over deductive reasoning, and a fine example of this is when she observes the damage Fitzroy causes, and then concludes that Daisy Fitzroy and Comstock must be the same.
They're just right for each other, aren't they?
Who?
Fitzroy and Comstock.
Even though we learn that's not the truth. We could spot more indicators of extroverted thinking when Elizabeth becomes stressed and enters NETE loops. A good example would be when she wanted to use her dead mother's hand to access Comstock's house to kill him.
Take a moment to think about what you're doing.
There. Will you open the door or do I have to go in without you?
Booker disagreed with her approach, but Elizabeth was more concerned with efficiency. This ends up backfiring. Speaking of stress and loops, we're going to be seeing more examples in the Burial at Sea version of Elizabeth. At the start of Burial at Sea, we can see Elizabeth within her NETE loop. She acts hostile and is direct with Booker, and completely changed her friendly and curious attitude to a more serious, confrontational, and opinionated one. This often causes her to butt heads with Booker. She often criticizes and cuts him off every time he has a question about her, with comments such as, "If I wanted to share my life story, Mr. DeWitt, I would write my memoirs," or refusing him to call him Booker when he asks nicely, referring to him as Mr. DeWitt.
It's Booker.
What?
Just call me Booker.
If it's all the same to you, let's leave it at Mr. DeWitt.
Other than her attitude being different, her methods have somewhat changed. Elizabeth still remains creative and relies on external information, but will often use it in immoral ways to achieve her goals, such as the time she distracted 3 store clerks so Booker could steal a mask so they could enter Sander Cohen's artistic event, or when she closed the vents and turned up the heat within them to burn Sally alive to lure her out. This is when Elizabeth would confront Comstock, who's presiding as Booker, who is trying to save Sally. Elizabeth then forces Comstock into realizing who he was and makes him face his past. After Elizabeth succeeded in breaking the man, she had him killed by distracting him as a Big Daddy impaled him with a large drill. She finally breaks out of her NETE loop and then discovers she also died. From this point on, she returns to a healthier mindset, and her TE function acts more of a passive function that she uses to figure out problems. Speaking of problems, she often relies on documentation or information on subjects to figure them out, such as using coded papers to figure out that Fontaine is Atlas, or figuring out that Fontaine's office was the best place to put the Lutece particle so they can cause a submerged city to rise from the depths of the ocean. Since this video is getting a little long, we're gonna have a secondary intermission with another fun fact. Do you recall seeing Souchong's codes? Did you know they were inspired by the periodic table and the Vigenère cipher, which is similar to the Caesar cipher? But the key word, in this case, was Souchong's name. And that's how Elizabeth was able to decipher everything he wrote down, because it was easy. And speaking of codes, did you know the password to exit his impromptu lab at the Silverfish was his birthday? Yeah, this guy. Never underestimate the fallibility of an egomaniac. And finally, the time has come. We have reached our inferior function, introverted sensing. Elizabeth mainly uses introverted sensing for recalling past information and their patterns to explain and understand situations, such as her feelings for Songbird. She simultaneously likes and dislikes him at the same time. In the past, it was a Songbird who fed her and gave her books, but as she grew older, she disliked him because she realized he was the warden to her prison.
He's just Comstock's pet, isn't he? Just like me.
Her dislike for the songbird was so strong that she drowned him at the end of the title. Even though she knew how to control him, she still decided killing him was better. She also fears her past so much that she would rather die than go back to the tower. She asks Booker to promise that he will not let the songbird take her back.
I will stop him.
That is an oath you cannot keep. But promise me that if it comes to it, you will not let him take me back.
It won't come to that. All right?
Sadly, he wouldn't be able to keep this promise because Elizabeth sacrifices herself to the songbird to save Booker's life. This leads to her being captured and tortured by Comstock, which also leads to our second version of Elizabeth, brainwashed old Elizabeth. This is where we notice Elizabeth's SI function enter a grip. She faults Booker for abandoning her for his selfish desires and blames them for helping the Vox Populi with her Civil War by turning Eden, aka Columbia, to Sodom.
A man once promised me that he would free me of my chains. But in the end, he abandoned me to serve his own needs. But in some ways, I thank him. He showed me exactly how much faith our species deserved.
She also uses both these reasons to drive her pursuit in destroying New York, a city she perceives as full of sinners who don't deserve salvation. She also connects the stories from the Bible, such as Adam and Eve, and explains that humanity always betrays God, and how her and God both have something in common:
Disappointment.
She does eventually break out of this SI grip and brings Booker 69 years into the future, where she gives him instructions on how to stop her from becoming her future self. Here's a little bonus fact that's attached to SI. Did you know that Elizabeth wears the same dress she had on when the songbird took her to Comstock? I'm not sure about you, but I believe that's a pretty big indicator of nostalgia, which is often associated with the SI trait. And now we'll be wrapping up this analysis by looking at the Burial at Sea Elizabeth. In Burial at Sea, we can spot a huge development within Elizabeth's SI function. She heavily relies on it to recall past information and connects it to the present, and this is best seen within her ability to remember how to read encrypted code. This talent is used to figure out how to repair the Lutece device, accidentally discover how to pair Big Daddies to Little Sisters, and decrypting the ace in the hole. These actions cause Elizabeth to be responsible for the destruction of Rapture and setting the path for Jack to save the Little Sisters. Speaking of connecting past information to the future, Elizabeth recognizes the Skyhook and Shock Jockey within the Rapture universe and uses that knowledge to help Booker. This doesn't go unnoticed and causes him to become more suspicious about her. Luckily, she also remembers Booker's personality functions and suppresses his suspicions by using Sally against him.
If you don't like the arrangement, the bathysphere's back that way.
The irony of the situation is that the real Booker DeWitt is her father, and she learned how to be tough from him.
You got a bit of the grifter.
For that, you can thank my father.
Oh, yeah?
He was a man comfortable in a variety of roles.
We'll be wrapping up this MBTI analysis with the most convincing SI indicator. Elizabeth committed the same atrocity as her father by selling Sally to lure and kill Zachary Hale Comstock. In the past, Booker sold Elizabeth to pay off a debt, and now Elizabeth sold Sally to pay off a debt to Booker. This decision ultimately emotionally destroys Elizabeth and causes her to return to Rapture, cementing her fate. In the end, Elizabeth paid off her debt by sacrificing herself to save Sally and the Little Sisters. The vicious circle of blood has been broken. And that concludes our in-depth MBTI analysis on Elizabeth. She's an unhealthy ENFP. But it ain't over yet. We have the Enneagram analysis coming up next. In order to figure out her Enneagram, we're going to have to look at the traits we see most within Elizabeth. The first traits she has are pretty self-explanatory. She's very outgoing, excitable, she's curious about everything, and most of all, extremely impulsive. And while we look at these traits, we can see that she could only really be one Enneagram, which would be 7. And even as she becomes more and more unhealthy throughout the game, she still presents the traits of 7. But this time it's reversed. She's no longer an adventurous ball of joy. Now she's cynical, and she wants to destroy anything that will get in the way of her joy, such as Comstock. She even makes it her own personal vendetta in the DLC BioShock Burial at Sea to kill Comstock and show him what he's done wrong. I'd even argue her wanting to join the Vox Populi and protect all the people was just her being impulsive by nature. Just because you need a lot of stimuli in order to maintain happiness doesn't mean that you are incapable of caring for others. Instead, that caring will be put in through action. And that is exactly what Elizabeth does. And now we'll be looking into her wing. This is what stabilizes her, and that wing is 6. The strongest 6 trait we see within Elizabeth is the skeptical side. This skepticism comes from fear of the unknown.
This is where I'm going.
If you want.
I don't like it here.
And that's one of the main traits of 6. Overall, Elizabeth mostly relies on her 7 to be very versatile and open in order to handle situations, and uses the 6 in order to be critical. And that would conclude that she's a 7-wing 6 who is unhealthy. And that concludes our analysis. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed what you see, subscribe and do all those fun YouTube things. Anyways, I'm wishing you a nice day, night, or evening.